All these calumnies reached the king's ears, some from Mushroom's own lips, for the fool confesses to having been paid, handsomely, to poison Aegon III against these maids and others. The dwarf was much in his grace's company following the death of Queen Jaehaera. Though his japes could not dispel the king's gloom, they delighted Geeman Palehair, so Aegon oft summoned him for the boy's sake. In his testimony, Mushroom says Tessario the Thumb gave him a choice between silver or steel, and, to my shame, I bade him sheath his dagger and seized that sweet fat purse. Nor were words the only means by which Lord Onwin sought to win his secret war for the king's heart, if the whispers can be believed. A groom was found abed with Tyshaera Lannister not long after the ball had been announced. Though Lady Tyshaera claimed the lad had climbed in her window uninvited, Grand Maester Munkin's examination revealed her maidenhead was broken. Lucinda Penrose was set upon by outlaws whilst hawking along Blackwater Bay, not half a day's ride from the castle. Her hawk was killed, her horse was stolen, and one of the men held her down whilst another slit her nose open. Pretty Falena Stokeworth, a vivacious girl of 8 who had sometimes played at dolls with the little queen, took a tumble down the serpentine steps and broke her leg, whilst Lady Buckler and both her daughters drowned when the boat that was carrying them across the Blackwater foundered and sank. Some men began to talk of a Maiden's Day curse, whilst others wiser in the ways of power saw unseen hands at work and held their tongues. Were the hand and his minions responsible for these tragedies and misfortunes, or were they happenstance? In the end it would not matter. Not since the reign of King Viserys had there been a ball of any sort in King's Landing, and this would be a ball like none other. At tourneys, fair maidens and high ladies vied for the honor of being named the Queen of Love and Beauty, but such reigns lasted only for a night. Whichever maid King Aegon chose would reign over Westeros for a lifetime. The highborn descended on King's Landing from keeps and castles in every part of the Seven Kingdoms. In an effort to limit their numbers, Lord Peake decreed that the contest would be limited to maidens of noble blood under 30 years of age, yet even so, more than 1,000 nubile girls crowded into the Red Keep on the appointed day, a tide far too great for the hand to stem. Even from across the sea they came. The Prince of Pentos sent a daughter, the Archon of Tyrosh a sister, and the daughters of ancient houses set sail from Myr and even old Volantis, though, sadly, none of the Volantin girls ever arrived at King's Landing, being carried off by corsairs from the Basilisk Isles on the way. Each maid seemed lovelier than the last, Mushroom says in his testimony, sparkling and spinning in their silks and jewels, they made a dazzling sight as they made their way to the throne room. It would be hard to picture anything more beautiful, unless perhaps all of them had arrived naked. One did, for all intents and purposes. Myrmidora Hayne, daughter of a Magister of Lee, turned up in a gown of translucent blue-green silk that matched her eyes, with only a jeweled girdle underneath. Her appearance sent a ripple of shock through the yard, but the Kingsguard barred her from the hall until she changed into less revealing garb. No doubt these maidens dreamed sweet dreams of dancing with the king, charming him with their wit, exchanging coy glances over a cup of wine. But there was to be no dancing, no wine, no opportunity for conversation, be it witty or dull. The gathering was not truly a ball in the ordinary sense. King Aegon III sat atop the Iron Throne, clad in black, with a golden circlet round his head and a gold chain at his throat, as the maidens paraded beneath him one by one. As the king's herald announced the name and lineage of each candidate, the girl would curtsy, the king would nod down at them, and then it would be time for the next girl to be presented. By the time the 10th girl was presented, the king had doubtless forgotten the first 5, mushroomsies. Their fathers could well have sneaked them back into the queue for another go-round, and some of the more cunning likely did. A handful of the braver maidens made so bold as to address the king, in an attempt to make themselves more memorable. Ellen Baratheon asked His Grace if he liked her gown. Her sister later put it about that her question was, "Do you like my breasts?" But there is no truth to that. Alyssa Royce told him she had come all the way from Runestone to be with him today. Patricia Redwyn went her one better by declaring that her party had traveled from the Arbor, and had thrice been forced to beat back attacks by outlaws. "I shot one with an arrow," she declared proudly. In the ass, Lady Anya Weatherwax, aged 7, informed His Grace that her horse's name was Twinklehoof and she loved him very much, and asked if His Grace had a good horse too. "His Grace has 100 horses," Lord Onwin answered impatiently. Others ventured compliments about his city, his castle, and his clothes. A northern maid named Barba Bolton, daughter of the Dreadfort, said, "If you send me home, Your Grace, send me home with food, for the snows are deep and your people are starving." The boldest tongue belonged to a Dornishwoman, Mariah Corgyle of Sandstone, who rose from her curtsy smiling and said, "Your Grace, why not climb down from there and kiss me?" Aegon did not answer her. He answered none of them. He gave each maid a nod, to acknowledge that he had heard them. Then Sir Marston and the Kingsguard saw them on their way. Music wafted over the hall all through the night, but could scarce be heard over the shuffle of footsteps, the din of conversation, and from time to time the faint, soft sound of weeping. The throne room of the Red Keep is a cavernous chamber, larger than any hall in Westeros save Black Herons, but with more than 1,000 maids on hand, each with her own retinue of parents, siblings, guards, and servants. It soon became too crowded to move, and suffocatingly hot, though outside a winter wind was blowing. The herald charged with announcing the name and lineage of each of the fair maidens lost his voice and had to be replaced. 4 of the hopefuls fainted, along with a dozen mothers, several fathers, and a septon. 1 stout lord collapsed and died. The Maiden's Day cattle show, Mushroom would name the ball afterward. Even the singers who had made so much of it beforehand found little to sing about as the event unfolded, and the king himself appeared ever more restless as the hours passed and the parade of maids continued. All this, says Mushroom, was just as the hand desired. Each time his grace frowned, shifted in his seat, or gave another weary nod, the likelihood of his choosing Lady Turnips increased, Lord Onwyn reasoned. Myriel Peake had arrived in King's Landing almost a moon's turn before the ball, and her father had made certain that she spent part of every day in the king's company. Brown of hair and eye, with a broad, freckled face and crooked teeth that made her shy with her smiles, Lady Turnips was 4 and 10, 1 year older than Aegon. She was no great beauty, Mushroom says, but she was fresh and pretty and pleasant, and his grace did not seem averse to her. During the fortnight leading up to Maiden's Day, the dwarf tells us, Lord Onwyn had arranged for Myriel to share half a dozen suppers with the king. Called upon to entertain during those long awkward meals, Mushroom tells us that King Aegon said little as they ate, but seemed more comfortable with Lady Turnips than he had ever been with Queen Jaehaera. Which is to say, not comfortable at all, but he did not seem to find her presence distasteful. 3 days before the ball, he gave her one of the little queen's dolls. "Here," he said as he thrust it at her, "you can have this." Not quite the words that innocent young maidens dream of hearing, perhaps, but Myriel took the gift as a token of affection, and her father was most pleased. Lady Myriel brought the doll with her when she made her own appearance at the ball, cradling it in her arms as if it were a babe. She was not the first to be presented, that honor went to the daughter of the Prince of Pentos, nor the last, Henrietta Woodhull, daughter of a landed knight from the Paps. Her father had seen to it that she came before the king late in the first hour, far enough back so he could not be accused of giving her pride of place, but far enough forward so King Aegon would still be reasonably fresh. When his grace greeted Lady Myriel by name and said not only, "It was good of you to come, my lady," but also, "I am pleased you like the doll," her father surely took heart, believing that all his careful scheming had borne fruit. Yet it would all be undone in a trice by the king's half-sisters, the very twins whose succession Onwyn Peake had been so determined to prevent. Fewer than a dozen maids remained, and the press had thinned considerably, when a sudden trumpet blast heralded the arrival of Baela Valerion and Rhaena Corbray. The doors to the throne room were thrown open, and the daughters of Prince Daemon entered upon a blast of winter air. Lady Baela was great with child, Lady Rhaena wan and thin from her miscarriage, yet seldom had they seemed more as one. Both were dressed in gowns of soft black velvet with rubies at their throats, and the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen on their cloaks. Mounted on a pair of coal-black chargers, the twins rode the length of the hall side by side. When Sir Marston Waters of the Kingsguard blocked their path and demanded they dismount, Lady Baela slashed him across the cheek with her riding crop. "His grace my brother can command me. You cannot." At the foot of the Iron Throne they reined up. Lord Onwyn rushed forward, demanding to know the meaning of this. The twins paid him no more heed than they would a serving man. "Brother," Lady Rhaena said to Aegon, "if it please you, we have brought your new queen." Her lord husband, Sir Corwin Corbray, brought the girl forward. A gasp went through the hall. Lady Daenerys of House Valerion, boomed out the herald, somewhat hoarsely, daughter of the late and lamented Darren of that house and his lady wife, Hazel of House Hart, also departed, a ward of Lady Baela of House Targaryen and Alan the Oakenfist of House Valerion, Lord Admiral, Master of Driftmark, and Lord of the Tides. Daenerys Valerion was an orphan. Her mother had been carried off by the winter fever, her father had died in the stepstones when his true heart went down. His own father had been that Sir Vaemond beheaded by Queen Rhaenyra, but Darren had been reconciled with Lord Alan and had died fighting for him. As she stood before the king that maiden's day, clad in pale white silk, Myrish lace, and pearls, her long hair shining in the torchlight and her cheeks flush with excitement, Daenerys was but 6 years old, yet so beautiful she took the breath away. The blood of old Valyria was strong in her, as is oft seen in the sons and daughters of the seahorse. Her hair was silver laced with gold, her eyes as blue as a summer sea, her skin as smooth and pale as winter snow. She sparkled, Mushroom says, and when she smiled, the singers in the galley rejoiced, for they knew that here at last was a maid worthy of a song. Daenerys' smile transformed her face, men agreed, it was sweet and bold and mischievous, all at once. Those who saw it could not fail to think, here is a bright, sweet, happy little girl, the perfect antidote to the young king's gloom. When Aegon III returned her smile and said, "Thank you for coming, my lady, you look very pretty," even Lord Onwin Peake surely must have known that the game was lost. The last few maidens were brought forward hurriedly to do their turns, but the king's desire to put an end to the parade was so palpable that poor Henrietta Woodhull was sobbing as she curtsied. As she was led away, King Aegon summoned his young cupbearer, Daemon Palehair. To him was given the honor of making the announcement. His Grace will marry Lady Daenerys of House Valerion. Daemon shouted happily. Caught in a snare of his own making, Lord Onwin Peake had no choice but to accept the king's decision with as much grace as he could muster. In a council meeting the next day, however, he gave vent to his wrath. By choosing for his bride a girl of 6, this sulky boy had thwarted the entire purpose of the marriage. It would be years before the girl was old enough to bed, and even longer until she could hope to produce a trueborn heir. Until such time the succession would remain clouded. The foremost duty of a regency was to guard the king against the follies of youth, he declared, follies such as this. For the good of the realm, the king's choice must be set aside, so that his grace might marry a suitable maid of childbearing age. Such as your daughter? Asked Lord Rowan. I think not. Nor were his fellow regents more sympathetic. For once, the council remained adamant, defying the hand's wishes. The marriage would proceed. The betrothal was announced the next day, as scores of disappointed maidens streamed out the city gates for home. King Aegon III Targaryen wed Lady Daenerys on the last day of the 133rd year since Aegon's conquest. The crowds that lined the streets to cheer the royal couple were significantly smaller than those who had come out for Aegon and Jaehaera, for the winter fever had carried off almost a fifth of the population of King's Landing, but those who did brave the day's bitter winds and snow flurries were delighted with their new queen, charmed by her happy waves, flushed cheeks, and shy, sweet smiles. Ladies Baela and Rhaena, riding just behind the royal litter, were greeted with exuberant cheers as well. Only a few took note of the king's hand farther back, with his face as grim as death.